She's violating landscaping regulations, Karen said, one hand on her hip, the other gripping a pellet rifle like it was her God-given badge. Her name was Catherine Whitley, compliance chair of the Red Maple Ridge HOA. She stood just beyond the busted front tire of my wife's wheelchair, still hissing from the impact. She was told not to use that path. My wife was still in the chair, shaking, wide-eyed. The tire had collapsed beneath her like a crumpled lung. Karen didn't flinch. I warned her. I stepped forward slowly. You shot her wheelchair. My voice was steady, even though everything in me screamed. It's a pellet. You're lucky I didn't call the police, she snapped. This is private property, and her tracks have been damaging the grass near the garden entrance for months. We've issued multiple citations. I cut her off. And that's a city easement. You don't control it. Her smirk twitched. Excuse me? That gate, that path, they're under municipal ADA regulation. Your HOA has no legal standing. She blinked. The silence held for a moment too long. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt powerless against an HOA gone mad, this isn't just a story. This is war. Where are you watching from? I turned slightly, eyes still on her. Name's Evan Mercer. I build and repair mobility systems for disabled veterans. Used to maintain turbine engines for FA-18s. If you're wondering whether I know what that chair costs or what it takes to keep someone like my wife mobile, you don't want that answer. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I crouched beside Lena, touched her shoulder. Her eyes were wet but locked on mine. I'd seen that look before, when she first realized the car accident had stolen her ability to walk. It wasn't fear, it was fury, but it was trapped inside her, again. That's what did it. This wasn't just about Karen's insane power trip or her clipboard crusade. It was about freedom, a gate Lena rolled through every morning to get to the community garden, the one place she still felt fully herself. That gate was her ritual, her control, and Karen knew it. She could have issued another fine, sent another email, but she picked this. She aimed and fired, and tried to make it look like order, like procedure. But it was cruelty, dressed up as compliance. I stood. Lena's going inside. I'm calling the city. Karen scoffed. You can try. You've blocked ADA access, discharged a weapon near a medical device. You escalated this. She hesitated, just a flicker of nerves. We're allowed to enforce regulations. Not with a pellet gun. Her expression faltered. I leaned in slightly. Do yourself a favor, Catherine. Go back inside. She turned and stormed off, muttering something about non-compliance and grounds for removal. I didn't care. I knelt again beside Lena and reached into my pocket for the small patch kit I carried in my glove box. Temporary fix. Enough to get her inside. I'm okay, she whispered, but her hand clenched mine so tightly it hurt. It took me an hour to get her settled. I cleaned the wheels, tested the joystick, ordered 2 new tires from the shop I used to work at. But every second of that hour, my chest was burning with something I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just Karen's power trip anymore. This was a violation of dignity, of health, of safety. And she thought she could get away with it. That's when the idea came. I picked up the phone and called the one person who knew how to dismantle a threat without blinking. Marcus, I said when he answered, I need you back here, now. You okay? No, but I know how we fix this. By morning, my brother's boots would be on the ground. I'd been the quiet one, the fixer. But Marcus? He was trained to take down hostile systems, and he knew exactly what kind of war this was. By the time I closed the front door behind me, the adrenaline was wearing off, but the fire in my chest stayed. Lena was resting finally, her head tilted back on the couch. She didn't say a word as I walked past her. She didn't have to. Her silence was the kind that filled every room, like a wire stretched so tight it hummed. I sat down at my desk and opened the HOA portal. The violations were all still there, 6 of them, just from the last 3 months. Each one written in the same clipped, officious tone. Unapproved architectural modification, ramp installation, unauthorized obstruction of lawn drainage path, wheelchair lift, parked in driveway overnight. Repeated use of back gate not designated for wheeled traffic. They made Lena sound like a hazard, like her presence alone was something that needed to be erased. But what hit me harder than the words was the pattern. Karen had been escalating. First, it was a courtesy notice about repainting the railings. Then the warning about the ramp, despite it being signed off by our city inspector. Then the fines started, one after another, $50, $100, $250. And they weren't just for us. I clicked through the portal's Community Compliance Archive and saw names I recognized. Diane at 14A, cited for potted plants outside the walkway. Ruben at 9C, penalized for hanging a wind chime the board said was too reflective. All elderly, all disabled, widowed, or quiet. I leaned back. This wasn't random. Karen wasn't just nitpicking. She was pruning, silencing the people she thought didn't belong in her curated little kingdom. I typed Red Maple Ridge ADA complaints into the city's online database. Nothing popped up, but that didn't mean much. Most people didn't know how to report this stuff. Or they were too afraid. I wasn't. I opened a blank document and began typing a report. Dates, details, photo attachments, the blocked gate, the tire damage, the citations, all of it. I couldn't file. Anything yet? Not until Marcus got here, and I verified the easement laws with someone who understood the system better than I did. But this was the groundwork, the playbook, and I was going to make sure the city saw what she'd done. It wasn't just about Lena anymore. This was about Diane, whose son stopped visiting after Karen threatened him over his license plate frame. About Ruben, who now shuffled to the front entrance instead of using his back gate. About the girl down the street with the autism service dog, cited for noise disruption, even though the dog never barked. Karen had become the queen of a silent war, and too many people were losing. My printer kicked on as I printed a few screenshots, violation notices, board announcements, gate photos. Not to use as evidence yet, but to hold something physical, real. I glanced out the window. The garden gate sat still under the morning light. A thin yellow chain now ran across it, padlocked. I remembered Lena's voice when she first found that garden. This is the only place in this neighborhood that doesn't feel designed to make me small. And now even that was gone. I stood, walked to the hallway mirror, and stared at myself. Not the mechanic, not the veteran, just a husband. A man who had fixed enough broken machines to know when something needed to be torn out by the roots. The sound of tires in the gravel pulled me back. Marcus. I stepped onto the porch before he knocked. His frame filled the doorway, taller, broader than me, still in service, still carrying the weight of 100 quiet battles. "You good?" he asked. "Not yet." He nodded. "Show me." We walked into my office, and I handed him the file. "Karen's been running a war through policy," I said. "I'm done playing defense." He didn't even blink. Then we hit back with the one thing she can't dodge. "What's that?" "Authority she can't outrank." And that's when I knew we had a shot. Marcus spent the next hour combing through the violations I'd printed, asking sharp, clipped questions as he pieced together the pattern of abuse. But before we could take the next step, we needed something bigger. Someone who'd actually seen what Karen did. Someone whose testimony couldn't be twisted into misinterpretation or hostile exaggeration. I knew exactly who that was, and apparently fate decided to drop him on my doorstep the very next morning. It started with a hesitant, almost ghost-like knock. Not the heavy knuckle rap of a confident neighbor. Not the pounding of another HOA warning. This one was thin, nervous. The kind of knock that sounded like it apologized for existing. I opened the door, and Tom Alvarez stood there, shoulders tucked forward, gripping the strap of an old canvas grocery bag like it was keeping him anchored to the earth. He looked smaller than usual, and he wasn't a small man. His eyes darted from me to the porch floor to the street and back to me again, like every direction held a threat. Can we talk?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stepped behind me, crossing his arms, not menacing, but solid, present. Tom flinched anyway. "It's okay," I said. "Come in." He didn't move. His feet stayed planted on the porch boards, weight shifting, knees bent like he was ready to run. His fingers trembled where they clutched the bag strap. His breathing hitched, shallow and uneven. He kept blinking rapidly like each blink was a decision he regretted. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered. She watches everything." "Karen?" I asked. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along the side of his face. He nodded once, tiny, scared, but unmistakable. I saw what she did," he whispered. The words shook him. His shoulders hunched up higher, chin dipping, eyes squeezing shut for half a second, as if saying it out loud broke something open inside him. I stepped aside so he could enter. He hesitated again, toes curling inside his shoes. Finally, he crossed the threshold like a man walking into a confession booth. We guided him into the living room. He didn't sit. He hovered near the armchair, fingers tapping the fabric, but never lowering himself. His whole body screamed conflict, leaning toward the chair, then away, lifting a hand, then dropping it, swallowing hard, then immediately licking his lips like the fear was drying out his mouth faster than he could keep up. "I didn't mean to get involved," he said quickly. "I mind my own business. Always have. Always will. It's just, she went too far. I knew she would, eventually. I knew that woman wasn't right." His breathing escalated again. His hands wrung around each other like he was trying to strangle the fear out of his own skin. "Tom," I said softly, "just tell us what you saw." He lifted his gaze to mine, and for the first time, I saw the guilt buried under the fear, heavy, thick, pulling at him like quicksand. "I saw her raise the pellet gun," he said. "I saw her aim it at Lena's wheelchair. I saw the tire explode. And I did nothing." His voice cracked on the last word. He pressed a fist to his forehead and squeezed his eyes shut again, as if reliving the moment. His knees buckled slightly. Marcus reached a hand toward him, but didn't touch, just stayed close enough to keep him grounded. "I should have yelled," Tom said. "Should have run over. Should have called someone. But all I could think was, last time someone crossed her, they got hit with so many fines they had to move. I can't afford that. I live alone. My pension barely covers." He stopped, chest heaving. I was scared. There it was, raw, unfiltered, human. I stepped closer. "You're here now. That matters." Tom shook his head violently. "She'll come after me. I know she will. She always does. She keeps records on people, notes, photos, things she prints. Out. She calls it compliance monitoring. But it's intimidation. Nothing happens in this neighborhood without her finding a way to weaponize it." Marcus exchanged a glance with me, one that said, "This is exactly the leverage we need." "Tom," I said, "we're not asking you to confront her. We're working with the city. They don't answer to her. All we need from you is the truth." He swallowed again, slow, shaky. Then he straightened a little, shoulders pulling back, spine rising from its fearful curl. "I'll tell them," he said, "everything. I won't let her do this to your wife, or anyone else." For the first time since he'd knocked on my door, his voice didn't waver. And just like that, the witness we desperately needed stopped running and chose to stand. By the next morning, Tom had written out his statement. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but it was solid, clean, no speculation, no exaggeration, just the truth. We made a copy, stored it in my locked cabinet, and left the original with Marcus. The plan was already in motion, but before we could trigger outside involvement, I needed to see how far Karen was willing to go, and how much the board was letting her get away with. So I walked to the HOA office annex, a small stucco building near the tennis courts, where the bulletin board hung in a locked glass case. That case had become something of a community scoreboard, a place where rules changed and power plays were announced, always behind that smug pane of plexiglass. The first thing I noticed was a fresh flyer. Mandatory compliance update. Unauthorized access to community spaces will result in legal action. Below that was a list of rules, typed in bold, all-caps font, the kind that screams even before you read it. One line caught my eye. Use of wheeled devices in lawn-adjacent spaces is considered damage and may result in civil penalties. No mention of wheelchairs, no ADA exception, no context. Just blanket criminalization of mobility. There it was. Karen had turned Lena's existence into a code violation. My jaw tightened as I kept reading. There were citations listed by lot number, not names, but I recognized the addresses. All familiar, all quiet people who'd stopped showing up to community events. There was even a section that said, "Repeat offenders will be reported to Neighborhood Watch for surveillance assistance." Surveillance? This wasn't just overreach. It was escalation. From fines, to weapons, to implied threats. A rustling sound caught my ear behind me. I turned to see an elderly man in a windbreaker standing by the mailbox cluster, watching me. He looked vaguely familiar, maybe a neighbor from 2 streets over. He raised an envelope slightly, then pointed toward the board. "She's not supposed to be writing those without a board vote," he said quietly. "You're saying this wasn't approved?" I asked. He shook his head. "Karen posts things. Before meetings happen, if the board disagrees, she says it's already in motion and too late to walk back. What about the president?" He snorted. "He hasn't shown up in 2 months." So it was true. Karen had filled the vacuum, taken control by attrition and fear, and turned HOA policy into her personal doctrine. The other board members were too passive or too complicit to stop her. I nodded at the man. "Thanks." He gave me a tight smile, then turned back to his mailbox like the conversation never happened. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the bulletin. Then I flipped through the newest letters in my own mailbox. Sure enough, another violation notice. Unauthorized structure, ramp extension not in architectural review archive. Daily fine of $50 until resolved. I folded the paper and slid it into my pocket. At this point, the fines were just noise. I wasn't paying them, and I wasn't tearing down that ramp. But now we had even more. Proof of rulemaking, without due process, discriminatory language in public notices, and fines that directly targeted medical access features. That was more than a pattern. It was evidence. Marcus was waiting back at the house when I returned. He took one look at my face and nodded without asking. "I'll send the first batch of documentation tonight," I said. "We're filing this under ADA violations and municipal code breach." "And the others?" he asked. "We're giving them a chance to speak, but if they stay silent, we'll name Karen directly. The liability trail leads back to her now." He tapped the folder on the table. "Once the city sees this, they won't just come for her. They'll come for everyone who let it happen." We returned to the garden gate the next afternoon, not to enjoy the view or find peace, but to measure the battlefield. The chain was still there, bright yellow, tensioned across the width of the entry path with a cheap padlock at the center, just low enough to block a wheelchair and just high enough to trip a cane. Marcus crouched beside it, one gloved hand brushing the gravel where Lena's wheelchair had rolled countless times. The cracked earth bore fresh grooves, deep, irregular, new, artificial. "She's been directing maintenance crews to deepen these," he said, tapping the edge of the ruts. "Probably to make it look like erosion. But this is manual work. Look at the shovel markings." I nodded, trying to blame the chair wheels for property damage. He stood and scanned the surroundings, Navy-trained eyes working through angles and access points. "That lock's illegal," he said. "The city owns this easement. It's meant to connect to the public sidewalk system. That makes it subject to ADA Title II. Blocking it violates federal accessibility standards." "You're sure?" I've worked military security infrastructure for 12 years. If this were a base walkway, that lock would trigger an immediate safety audit, especially if someone was injured trying to pass it." He pointed to the faded blue accessibility placard on the side fence. "And that sign right there proves they acknowledged it as an ADA path. This is textbook non-compliance." The gate clanked slightly in the wind. Beyond it, the community garden stood quiet. Raised beds full of fall tomatoes and lavender gone brittle. The space had been designed to be inclusive, advertised as wheelchair-friendly when the neighborhood was built. Karen's war wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Disabling by design. Marcus pulled a tape measure from his backpack. He measured the gap between the fence posts, then the clearance beneath the chain. "Low enough to impede a walker," he muttered. "Too narrow for mobility chairs. And here?" He pointed to a splintered mark on the post. "This chain's been moved higher since last week. She adjusted it." I stepped back, staring at the whole scene. This wasn't neglect. It was calculated. "What happens if the city inspector sees this?" I asked. "He'll cite it on the spot, and depending on who reports it, it may escalate to federal review." He pulled out his phone and snapped photos from multiple angles, then took a video for good measure. I looked at the cracked pavement below the gate, the worn tire marks, the cheap chain, the shadow of the sign declaring accessible pathway in peeling paint. "She said Lena was damaging the lawn," I said quietly. "She used that as justification to fire." Marcus's jaw locked. "You mean to shoot?" The word hung there between us. I hadn't let myself say it out loud until now. Shoot, my wife's mobility device, on private property, in broad daylight. I exhaled slowly. You still have contacts in federal compliance? He nodded. A couple, not in an official capacity, but they'll tell me which forms to use, where to file, who not to waste time on. I leaned on the fence post and stared through the chain. She picked this gate because it meant something. She knew Lena would keep coming here, even when the ramp, the mailbox, the clubhouse, they all became battlefields. Marcus dropped the tape measure into his bag. Then this is where we make our move. I looked at him. No more warnings, I said. He nodded once. We walked back in silence, the wind creaking the gate behind us. I kept thinking about that lock, the sound it made when it snapped into place, how it wasn't loud, but final. But this time, it wouldn't hold. That night, I uploaded the photos, the measurements, the violation history, and a brief video clip of Lena sitting by that gate in her chair, staring at the chain in silence. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It just needed to show the truth. The sun was going down when I returned to the garden gate, but I didn't go all the way. Instead, I sat on the old park bench about 20 feet, back, half hidden behind a dogwood tree that had lost most of its leaves. From that angle, I could see the chain, the crushed gravel path, the little worn-out sign with the fading accessibility logo. But more than that, I could see the space itself. Lena used to call it her reset button. Every morning she'd leave the house, wheel down the sidewalk, and slip through that gate like it was her own front porch. That garden was her oxygen, her quiet way of telling the world she was still in it, still moving, still whole, in ways no chair could take from her. And now it was a cage. A chained-off reminder that someone else had decided she didn't belong there anymore. She came to sit with me a few minutes later, rolling up in the backup chair with the temporary tires I'd installed. They weren't smooth. They wobbled slightly on the uneven sidewalk. I winced at every bump. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Yeah," I said. "Marcus got the proof. We've got the measurements, the codes, the jurisdiction boundaries. It's all there. They broke the law, and we can prove it." She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just looked at the gate. "It still feels like she won," she whispered. That hit harder than I expected. Lena wasn't a crier. Even after the accident, she never let herself sink into pity. She fought through rehab, through recovery, through humiliation after humiliation. But this was different. It wasn't just her body that had been targeted. It was her autonomy. "She didn't win," I said, but my voice cracked. I reached out and took her hand. She squeezed back. "I just want to go pick Basil again," she said, barely audible. There it was. The heart of it. Not some grandstand, not revenge. Just normalcy. The right to roll through a garden gate and feel like a person instead of a violation. That's when it stopped being about the HOA. It stopped being about Karen's power trip, or fines, or weapons, or bulletin board threats. This was about human dignity, about Lena, about the quiet battle millions of people fought every day just to exist without being punished for it. I felt something shift inside me then. Not just anger, but clarity, purpose, the kind that made every step feel like it was carrying weight. I stood up and looked at the gate again. "Tomorrow, I file," I said. "City, state, ADA office, insurance claims board. I'll burn their time and paperwork until someone answers." "And if they don't?" she asked. "They will," I said. "Because we'll make sure they can't ignore it." She nodded once. Not a smile, but something steadier. We sat there a while longer. A few birds rustled in the trees overhead. A dog barked down the street. Somewhere across the park, a sprinkler sputtered to life and clicked in rhythm with the wind. It was all so normal, and that made the injustice sting even more, because she should have been part of this neighborhood, this evening, this life, not isolated by someone with a clipboard and a power complex. When we got home, I went straight to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started typing. Marcus brought me a glass of water and dropped a folder next to me. "Just so you know," he said, "I talked to an old contact in the city's Office of Civil Compliance. There's already a red flag on Red Maple Ridge's HOA profile from a 2019 complaint. Small one, but it's a crack. Then we'll hit it until it breaks open. I uploaded the documents, labeled the evidence folders, attached Tom's signed statement. I bookmarked the intake portal for the Department of Housing's Fair Access Division. And then, for the first time in weeks, I exhaled. Tomorrow, we wouldn't ask. We'd act. I was halfway through attaching scanned photos to our ADA complaint when I heard the creak of footsteps on the porch, not the hurried stomp of a delivery guy, not the stiff tread of Karen's patrol rounds, softer, slower, familiar. I stood and opened the door before he could knock. Tom Alvarez was standing there again, but this time he wasn't clutching a grocery bag like a shield. He was holding a thin manila folder, his fingers wrapped around it like it might slip away if he hesitated. "I don't know if this helps," he said, "but I couldn't sleep without giving it to you." I stepped aside. "Come in." He didn't. Instead, he handed me the folder, then glanced nervously down the street. "She's at the clubhouse," he whispered. "Board meeting prep. I've got about 10 minutes before someone notices." I opened the folder. Inside were copies, meeting notices, community bulletins, and one document that caught my eye immediately. Architectural Compliance Amendment Proposal, April 2023. It was unsigned, marked draft, and in the margin, someone had scrawled, "Do not circulate until approved, risk of challenge." I scanned the contents. It was a proposed policy that would have reclassified all wheelchair ramps as temporary medical structures subject to visual review, and it included a clause that allowed removal at the board's discretion. My stomach turned. "Karen wrote this," Tom said quietly. "She tried to push it through last spring. The board president shut it down after a lawyer neighbor threatened to sue. But she kept using the language in emails: non-conforming ramp, aesthetic obstruction. I heard her say it at a board mixer like it was already policy." He looked down at the porch floor. "It's not official, never was, but she's been enforcing it anyway." That was it, the missing link. "She created a fake rule," I said slowly, "and used it to justify violations, threats, retaliation." Tom nodded. "And the fines. She told me last month that if the board doesn't set the standard, the streets will." I thought she was just venting, but now... I looked up. "Do you have anything with a date? Something to prove this proposal was never adopted?" Tom reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a newsletter from May, one that made no mention of any ramp revisions. "I kept this because it had the recipe for those lemon cookies I like," he said sheepishly. "Didn't realize it'd be evidence." It was enough. Karen had fabricated enforcement authority, not just through intimidation, but through misinformation. She'd told homeowners rules existed that didn't, and she punished them based on it. Marcus appeared behind me, hearing the last part. "That's abuse of power," he said, "and misrepresentation. If she used that language in fines or property notices, she's opened up civil liability." Tom shifted his weight, eyes darting again toward the sidewalk. "I don't want to go public, not yet. But if you give my statement to the right people, I want them to know I tried to do something." "You did more than that," I said. He nodded once, and then, for the first time since I'd known him, he actually stood a little taller, still nervous, but no longer bent by it. He turned and walked down the steps without another word. I looked down at the folder in my hands, heart pounding. This was more than a testimony. This was leverage. Karen had overreached, not just by acting like the law, but by pretending to write it. And now, we had the paper trail. Marcus exhaled sharply behind me. "We file tonight." "Yeah," I said. "And this time, we include everything. Tom's timeline, the draft policy, the surveillance language, the false citations." He nodded. "That should be enough to trigger review by both ADA Compliance and the city's Housing Commission." I looked out at the garden path, barely visible from the porch. "She forged authority," I said. "Now she gets to watch it collapse." We cleared the kitchen table, pushed back the fruit bowl, unplugged the little ceramic lamp Lena liked, spread out every folder, printout, and photo across the oak surface until the entire table became a war map. Violation letters, HOA announcements, photos of the chain at the gate, ADA signage, screen captures of the HOA's online portal. And now, thanks to Tom, proof that Karen had enforced a fake policy that was never approved. Marcus cracked his knuckles and flipped open his laptop. "We'll need 3 different filings," he said. First is ADA Title II non-compliance for blocking a federally protected path. Second is a municipal zoning complaint for misuse of community property access. Third is a civil rights grievance if we want to tie it to discrimination. I sat beside him, pulling up the digital folders. Tom's statement goes to all three. That proposal she wrote, that's our cornerstone. And the surveillance threat? Marcus asked, nodding toward the HOA flyer. City won't like that either, especially if she referenced neighborhood. Watch without a formal agreement. He grinned. You think she filed one? Not a chance. Karen lives off theater. She wants control, not paperwork. We started assembling the case in sections. Each complaint had its own evidence folder. I labeled them. Pathway blockade, fabricated policy, unlawful fines, witness testimony, weapon incident, and community impact. For the ADA complaint, we compiled Lena's medical paperwork, the garden gate photos, and Marcus's measurements. I even added a clip from Lena's first day using the path, her voice laughing on video as she rolled past blooming sunflowers. She hasn't laughed like that in weeks, I muttered. Marcus didn't say anything. He just uploaded the video to the complaint form. We moved to the zoning issue next. Karen's chain didn't just block access, it violated Red Maple Ridge's own easement map. I pulled up the development's plat plan from the city website and circled the path in red. It was marked public right-of-way. That meant HOA interference wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. She crossed into city jurisdiction, Marcus said, reviewing the map. That's grounds for formal review, might even void her position if it's seen as abuse. I turned to the final document, the civil grievance. This one felt different. It wasn't about codes or structures, it was about people, about how Karen targeted Lena, Ruben, Diane, anyone who didn't fit her curated vision of what this neighborhood should look like. I included Tom's statement, Ruben's email from last year, quietly thanking us for speaking up when he was fined for his service flag. The audio clip Karen left on the voicemail last spring. We have to discourage patterns of dependency before this place looks like a care facility. That was the nail in the coffin. We uploaded everything, checked the boxes, entered contact info. I listed Marcus as the secondary contact in case anything came back classified or official. You ready to file these? He asked. Not yet, I said. There's one more thing. I pulled out Lena's damaged wheelchair tire, the one Karen shot. The rim was still bent from the impact, the rubber torn open in a perfect puncture. I snapped a close-up photo, then held the tire in my hands for a long second. Add that to the ADA submission, I said. Make it clear this wasn't theoretical. This was violence against someone vulnerable. Marcus nodded. We uploaded the image and locked the final attachments. Each complaint had a confirmation number. Each number felt like a countdown, not just toward Karen's downfall, but toward something bigger, justice, dignity, the restoration of something she tried to take. I leaned back in my chair. The kitchen was quiet now, just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional tick of the overhead clock. Marcus looked at me. You good? I will be, I said, once that chain comes down. He hit submit. 3 files, 3 agencies, 3 storm fronts rolling toward a woman who thought nobody could touch her. Tomorrow, we start knocking on doors. The library wasn't busy, which was exactly what we needed. Rows of silent computers blinked in screensaver mode, and the woman at the desk gave us a quiet nod as we walked in. I headed straight for the last station in the corner, away from windows, tucked behind the periodicals. Marcus followed with the case binder tucked under one arm and a flash drive in the other. We weren't just filing reports anymore. We were building a network. I logged in and pulled up the cloud folders. Every complaint had been confirmed. I'd received emails from each agency. ADA Compliance Office. Review in progress. A local compliance officer has been assigned. Municipal Zoning Authority. Formal notice of inspection pending. State Civil Rights Division. Preliminary review under community governance abuse statutes. That was the slow burn, but now we needed something faster, visible pressure, something Karen couldn't control, something the other board members couldn't ignore. We started with a list. Every homeowner who had been cited by Karen in the past 12 months. Tom had helped us get most of the names. Marcus and I filled in the rest using HOA newsletters, online records, and archived board meeting summaries. 37 violations, 17 repeat offenders, all nonviolent, all trivial, plants, flags, sidewalk chalk, wind chimes, wheelchair ramps. I drafted a short message. Dear neighbor, you're receiving this because you've been affected by recent HOA enforcement actions. We're organizing a formal response to board overreach and need your voice. If you're willing to share your experience, anonymously or otherwise, please contact us. We're submitting a community statement to municipal and ADA investigators. You are not alone. We printed 20 copies and left the rest for email. Marcus hit send on the digital batch. I started placing the printed ones in manila envelopes. We'd deliver those tonight, doorsteps only, no conversations yet. Just quiet flags, signals that something was shifting. Across from me, Marcus pulled up a new page. Neighborhood Watch Registration Database, he said. I'm checking to see if Karen ever registered with the city like she claimed. A few minutes later, he shook his head. Nothing, no active registration, no patrol logs. Her watch group is as fake as her ramp policy. I added the finding to our evidence log, another crack in her foundation. We moved next to the insurance angle. If Karen's enforcement led to property damage, and especially if it triggered legal action, the HOA's general liability insurance could be compromised. We drafted a notification to the HOA's listed carrier, citing patterned non-compliance behavior that may expose the board to ADA-based liability claims. Marcus handled the phrasing. He knew how to write like an officer, factual, calm, lethal. We saved the draft and scheduled it for delivery the next day. The last thing we did was build a timeline, from Lena's first citation, to the padlocked gate, to the pellet gun, to Tom's confession, to the false policy enforcement. Every piece fit, and every piece was dated, sourced, and cross-referenced. By the time we finished, the library lights dimmed in warning. We'd been there for hours. As we packed up, Marcus looked at me across the binder stack. You realize, he said, if even half the neighbors respond, the board can't bury this. They'll try, I said, but the city won't. And if they stall, then we go public. He nodded. As we stepped into the cold evening, I looked out across the rooftops of Red Maple Ridge. So many windows were dark, people hiding, staying quiet, enduring. But soon, they'd know they weren't the only ones. And when they did, the silence would break. The next move was Karen's, and she wouldn't see it coming. I arrived early. The HOA clubhouse sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, framed by hedges that Karen had trimmed with military precision. The parking lot was empty except for the board president's sedan and a golf cart with a compliance patrol sticker peeling off its side. Marcus parked beside me in the truck. He'd been quiet the whole ride over, focused, watching. You ready for this? He asked. Yeah, I said. It's not just us anymore. Because that morning, something changed. I'd opened my inbox to find 7 responses, 7 neighbors who'd received our letter and decided they'd had enough. One of them, an older woman named Joyce, even offered photos of her yard before and after Karen's forced removal of her wheelchair-accessible garden bed. Another sent a voicemail from Karen, demanding voluntary compliance with a policy that didn't exist. But the most important message came from the city itself. A short email, plain text. Inspector Ortega will be present at Red Maple Ridge HOA on Thursday at 5 p.m. for on-site compliance verification. HOA board members are expected to attend. That was today, and Karen didn't know it yet. Marcus pulled a clipboard from behind the seat. Inside was a printed copy of every formal complaint, Tom's statement, and the unofficial policy Karen had tried to pass off as regulation. We weren't here to confront her. We were here to witness, to watch the system she'd twisted finally snap back into place. At 4:53 p.m., cars started pulling in. Karen arrived in a silver crossover, her sunglasses perched like armor. She glanced at me once, then quickly looked away. She was wearing a navy blazer, her clipboard already in hand, tapping it against her thigh like a metronome of control. "Why are you here?" she called out sharply. "Board meeting," I said simply. She narrowed her eyes but said, "Nothing." The other board members trailed in behind her, 2 older men, 1 middle-aged woman. None of them met my gaze. I couldn't tell if they were ashamed or just tired. Tom showed up last. He stood near the far edge of the parking lot, arms crossed, not hiding anymore, but not inserting himself either, just present. At exactly 5:02, a Silver City vehicle pulled in and parked across two faded spots. The door opened and a tall man stepped out, wearing a windbreaker with the ADA compliance badge stitched above his breast pocket. "Mr. Ortega?" I asked, stepping forward. He nodded. "You're Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, thank you for coming." He glanced around. "I'll be inspecting the common areas, specifically any public easements and paths designated for community access." Karen's face had gone rigid. "I wasn't notified of any inspection," she said, her voice tight. Ortega pulled a small tablet from his bag. "That's correct. As per protocol, surprise inspections are standard following ADA Title II grievances." She opened her mouth again, but this time Marcus stepped forward and handed Ortega the full binder. "These are supplemental materials submitted by residents," he said calmly. "Multiple patterns of discrimination, non-compliance, and fabricated enforcement." Ortega flipped it open, scanned the first few pages, and nodded. "Thank you. I'll need to verify conditions firsthand before addressing the board." Karen turned on her heel and stormed into the clubhouse. We stayed outside. One by one, neighbors trickled in. No one spoke loudly, no one carried signs. But they came, slowly, steadily, filling the edges of the parking lot and lawn. Some leaned on canes, some pushed strollers. One woman wheeled up in a mobility scooter, her scarf flapping in the wind. I recognized them all, the ones Karen had fined, shamed, silenced. Now they were here, watching, bearing witness. Ortega made his rounds quickly. Garden gate, sidewalk slope, ramp gradient, all documented. When he re-emerged from the gate path 15 minutes later, his face was unreadable. He walked toward the clubhouse without a word. I turned to Marcus. "It's happening." He nodded once. Karen had built her kingdom on silence, on rules no one questioned. Now the questions were coming, and this time, she wouldn't be the one asking. The board meeting room smelled like coffee and old carpet glue, small, windowless, with fluorescent lights that made everything look more sterile than it was. A row of folding chairs faced a long laminate table where the HOA board sat. Papers neatly stacked, clipboards aligned like weapons ready for use. Karen stood at the center. She hadn't taken off her sunglasses. To her right sat the acting treasurer, pretending to review notes. To her left, the secretary flipped through a binder without turning on her mic. The president's chair was still empty. At exactly 5:31, Inspector Ortega stepped inside. The room fell quiet. Karen looked up, feigning surprise. "I wasn't told we'd have a guest today." "You weren't supposed to be," Ortega replied calmly, taking a seat near the far end of the table. "This is a post-complaint inspection, Title II compliance review. I've already completed the on-site assessment. I'd like to address a few issues directly with the board." Karen didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened on the edge of her clipboard. "I've been in charge of compliance for 4 years," she said. "We've always maintained high standards for safety and appearance." Ortega raised an eyebrow. "Is that why the ADA-mandated access path to the community garden is blocked by a padlocked chain?" Karen paused. That area was seeing damage from unauthorized wheeled traffic. As a precaution— "Wheeled traffic?" Ortega cut in. Karen's mouth opened, but the room was already shifting. A murmur ran through the residents seated behind us. Wheelchair users, parents with strollers, older neighbors with walkers. He clicked his pen and wrote something down. "Can you show me the board-approved minutes authorizing the gate restriction?" Karen blinked. The treasurer cleared his throat. "That wasn't formally voted on. So it was implemented without legal authority," Ortega said, not even asking, just stating. Karen's voice raised half a pitch. "We have the right to enforce aesthetic and safety standards. That's in our charter. Not at the expense of federal access law," Ortega replied, "and not through unapproved personal policy." He turned to the audience. Several residents have submitted copies of HOA correspondence that reference fabricated rules, ones not present in the governing documents or bylaws. In particular, the so-called Architectural Compliance Amendment that classified wheelchair ramps as temporary structures subject to removal. Karen's clipboard dropped slightly. "That document was a working draft," she said sharply. "But it was cited in violation letters," Ortega said, "used as the basis for fines, threats, penalties. Do you deny that?" She hesitated. Those were templates, auto-generated. From the back, someone laughed bitterly. Tom Alvarez stood slowly. I was on the email list, he said. I heard you talk about fixing the neighborhood's image. You use that fake rule to threaten people like Lena Mercer, and people like me. Karen turned, face flushed. I have every right to enforce. You had a pellet gun, someone else shouted. All at once the room cracked open. Voices rose. Words tumbled over each other. She made me remove my ramp. She told me I'd be evicted if I didn't paint the lift. My son got cited for pushing me in my own wheelchair. The board looked overwhelmed, shifting in their chairs. Only Ortega remained calm, still writing. When the noise finally died down, he spoke again. As of this evening, the Red Maple Ridge HOA is being referred for further investigation under ADA enforcement protocol. Immediate corrective action will be recommended. Additionally, your liability carrier will be notified due to pattern-based risk exposure. Karen finally sat. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Not defeated, just exposed. Ortega stood. A full report will be sent within 10 business days. Residents who submitted documentation may receive follow-ups. In the meantime, the gate must be reopened. All citations issued under non-ratified policies are to be voided. Then he turned to me. Mr. Mercer, thank you for your cooperation. I nodded. He walked out, calm as ever. Karen didn't say another word. Neither did the board, because the room had already answered for them. The chain was gone. No more yellow links stretched across the gate. No lock, no padlock post. Just the clean open archway Lena used to roll through every morning before Karen decided she didn't belong. It had only been 4 days since the inspection, but the transformation felt like months of silence cracking all at once. Lena rolled beside me, her chair gliding effortlessly over the repaired gravel path. The city had sent maintenance crews the day after the ADA ruling. Ortega's full report was already online. 15 pages of citations, required corrections, and liability notices. Karen had resigned the same morning. Technically, Marcus said, she submitted a letter of personal leave. But everyone knew what that meant. The board had restructured within 48 hours. An emergency vote was scheduled. The president, silent for months, had finally shown up and quickly announced his exit for health reasons. Half the neighbors applauded. I looked at the gate again. A new sign hung beside it now. Clear, bold, impossible to ignore. Accessible pathway, protected under federal law. All residents welcome. It wasn't flashy, it didn't need to be. Lena leaned forward and touched the edge of the sign, then looked back at me. Her eyes didn't hold tears this time. They held something steadier. I never thought I'd come back here, she whispered. You never should have had to leave, I said. She smiled gently and pushed forward into the garden. Around us, neighbors moved in and out. Tom Alvarez waved from across the lawn. Ruben sat on a bench with his daughter, pointing out the flowers. Even Joyce, the woman with the ripped-out planter, had replanted her herbs, the smell of rosemary and thyme trailing behind her like defiance in bloom. The space felt different now, not just safer. Owned, claimed, free. Marcus joined me at the edge of the path, hands in his jacket pockets. Did you ever think it'd work? He asked. No, I said honestly, but I couldn't not try. He nodded slowly, watching Lena disappear into the rows of garden beds. You did good, big brother. I swallowed hard. We did good. We didn't take down the whole HOA. That wasn't the goal. But we ripped out the root of its rot and reminded people that power only works when no one questions it, when no one stands up. And now, people were standing. I followed Lena into the garden, stepping carefully around a patch of marigolds. She was already at her favorite spot, bed number 7, the one with the low trellis and the soft soil. She reached down, dug her hands into the dirt, and smiled without saying a word. That was the real win, not the paperwork, not the inspector, not the fines reversed or the chain removed. It was that smile, that quiet return to normal where no one had to fight to exist. If you've ever felt small in your own neighborhood, if someone tried to silence you with paperwork, threats, or clipboards disguised as law, hear me now. You're not alone. The rules only work if we don't challenge them. And the right to belong doesn't come from a handbook. It comes from truth. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, Hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because someone out there needs to know it's possible, and today, they'll see it.